Force will be with you. Always. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. This is a special episode of the Film Threat Podcast. I can't promise this will be a non-spoiler review of Star Wars: The Last Jedi. I am sitting in a car in a parking lot just outside the Disney lot, and my good friend, filmmaker and pop culture commentator, and probably one of the best people I know on social media, Charles de Lauzirika, is sitting in the car with me, and I'm sure this is very awkward. But
it looks very awkward being in a parking lot in the dark in Burbank. Yeah, it seems very strange, but it's in the name of Star Wars.
So we just we got out of the film, had to kind of process a little bit. I don't think that we're completely done processing everything that we saw, and I will say it's really difficult to talk about the film because some of the biggest moments of the movie do involve spoilers. So if you're listening to this, you are choosing to listen to this, spoilers are likely going to be discussed. So you have been warned at the top, but I would say that, and I posted this on social media right after, it's not a spoiler, this is the most I have cheered, it's the most I have applauded, the most I've laughed, and I did get choked up and well up with tears a couple times seeing the film. What was your initial reaction in terms of the emotion? Because for a lot of people, Star Wars is an emotional experience. It hits people differently, but that I think is common.
Well, I think, us having been kids during the release of the original trilogy, like our emotional reaction to those films was mostly one of joy and excitement and sort of thrilling along with the adventure of what those films were, with some minor, not minor, but some secondary interest in the soap opera of it. I think we were more about the wars and the stars, and not so much the family dramas, but that eventually became a bigger thing by the time Return of the Jedi came out. So obviously because of the huge cliffhanger in Empire. This film to me is the first time I have felt this emotionally charged by Star Wars since Return of the Jedi, for sure, possibly even Empire. And it's weird because we've talked about this. It's like what this film gets right, it really gets right. It gets right, so right. But it does have some really maddening, dumb things in it, which you wonder how did that slip through, considering how the vast majority of it is so amazing. And plus, seeing it with an audience just completely took it to a whole other level, because this is like our third year of this kind of ritual where we get to see the Star Wars film like a few days before it opens in the Disney lot. And when we saw Force Awakens, the reaction was fairly dry. It was fairly like Hollywood studio cold, and same with Rogue One. And I think we were sitting there thinking, let's root along with this film. Today was the first time that the audience actually lost their minds. At like
a few moments, 5
or 6 scenes in the film, people just went nuts. And we, along with them, we were cheering, we were applauding, we were crying, we were laughing. I mean, it's like this film is so emotionally connected to the audience in a way I haven't seen a Star Wars film and many Hollywood franchise films in years, probably since the 80s, I have to say.
And so I have to give it up to Rian Johnson for this. From this standpoint, he went for it. He really went for it in terms of the conflict. The relationship between Rey and Kylo Ren is at the center of this. They communicate in an almost... They're connected. There's some strange connection between the two of them. And I feel like more is to be revealed in Episode 9. But I didn't feel the sense of incompletion I felt with Force Awakens, where Force Awakens ended and all I cared about was, I want to see the next movie where there's more Luke. Luke is at the center of this in the beginning. And, I don't want to say too much. I just say that the Luke scenes, this is the best thing Mark Hamill has ever done. The Kylo Ren Rey scenes, their relationship, their weird, strange, they have almost an anti-chemistry. I mean this in a positive way. Just works so well. And there are moments that are twists that I could not have predicted. And Yeah, if you're still listening to this and haven't seen the movie, you should not be listening to this podcast. But I'm trying to avoid talking about things.
Well,
but
I mean, I would just say what I loved about the Kylo Ray relationship in this is that they're frenemies now. You know?
Oh, right.
And that was really fun to see, because you sense that he has a genuine, I'm not gonna say affection for Rey, but a genuine interest in her, and he wants the best for her. It's just that his version of the best is going to the dark side. But it's not that he's trying to destroy her, and it's not that he's trying to dominate or control her. In this film, you really feel like he wants to have a connection with her that's more than just hero, villain, good, bad, Jedi, Sith. It's like he wants to be with her as a friend, you know, or some kind of, you know, I don't think there's anything romantic happening, and who knows if they're even related, because even, you know, Rey's lineage is sort of cleared up in this a little bit, but not to complete satisfaction.
I don't think it's definitive. There's mention of who Rey's parents are, except I'm not 100% sure I believe it. It could be one of those Obi-Wan fibs.
From a certain point of view.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But here's the thing, is, I mean, without giving it away, what we find out about Rey's parents, I loved, actually. I thought it was great, because it goes completely against the notion that every hero in a Star Wars film has to be this sort of privileged messiah character, you know, and the fact that it boils down to Rey is just kind of an average person who has been thrust into this grand adventure and has discovered this thing inside of her that she has, you know, a very strong connection with and an ability for, is great. And I think that opens it up in a way that it's not just, you know, Luke or Yoda or whoever's saying, you know, the Force runs strong in your family, or the prequels, you know, your midichlorian count is high. It basically shows that the Force is in all of us. And it's like, what basically your ability to use the Force comes out of your own qualities as a human being. It's like, if you're a good person, if you work hard, if you focus, if you do all the things that a Jedi, you know, trained to do, you could possibly have those powers as well.
Well, I mean, it reminds me of a line from the Family Guy Star Wars, where one of the characters says, "You don't believe in the Force, do you? You mean that thing you learned about just 4 hours ago?" Like, yeah, one thing I did love about the Force, which was ruined by the prequels, is that anyone, if you believed and if you worked hard, you could be, you know, in touch with the Force, and you could be, anybody could be a Jedi. And the prequels kind of ruined that by turning it into a blood disease with midichlorians, and now it's sort of back to possibly anybody could do this. But I feel that there's more, a little bit more to the story. Before we get into some of the deeper issues, this is the most, we were talking about, this is the most culturally, ethnically diverse Star Wars film ever made. There's a major action scene that opens the movie that, there is an Asian character in the film that is very heroic, and we have not gotten to see this in previous Star Wars films. You know, some of the, like, you know, when you look back to the original Star Wars, I think it's kind of quaint that all the guys in the X-wings, first of all, it's all white guys, and one of the guys is overweight, and he's called Porkins. I don't know, like, I feel like today that just seems kind of dumb, but so I think that's worth noting. The other thing is the humor in the film. A lot of people complained about the Porgs. The people who complained and hate the Porgs are going to love The Last Jedi. That's all I'll say, because I think the issue with humor in Star Wars, because every Star Wars movie, every single one, has moments of cuteness and humor, especially cute humor. And I think to make it work, it's all about screen time. The less screen time, that's why Jar Jar didn't work, is Jar Jar had too much screen time. He should have been a side character that was comic relief, and comic relief is, you know, relegated to, you know, not so much. The Porgs in the movie completely, totally work. People who love them will love it, and people who hate Porgs will also love it. But yes, what would you have to say about Porgs?
No, it's interesting because it is like they market researched Porgs before they even made this film. It's like they kind of charted the sort of like surprise that there are these cute little characters in the film, to the acceptance and the pop culture reaction to that, to the backlash, to the then renaissance of the porgs. It's Disney and Lucasfilm so smartly looked ahead into the future to what how the audience was going to react to the porgs, and therefore they did this sort of meta commentary on the porgs throughout the film. So it's like everything you could possibly think about the porgs. You love them, you hate them, you're sick of them, they're all addressed in the film. Like every facet of the porg timeline is fully explored, mostly for jokes. But man, there's one scene. I don't know if we should talk about it.
No, you should.
There's one scene with the porgs I still cannot believe. It almost took like on a George Romero quality in terms of like how disturbing it was in terms of consuming flesh. But it was scary.
Yeah. But so the other thing is, this is, I think, because a lot of people don't realize that the original Star Wars was a commentary on the Vietnam War. That was George Lucas's intention, was to use Star Wars, in particular the Ewok final battle on the moon of Endor, as a way to talk about the Vietnam War. This Star Wars film actually is probably in terms of social commentary, has the most social commentary of any Star Wars movie, but in a way that like it's not obvious. It doesn't hit you over the head in a way that is annoying. So let me just say that when I point this out, I didn't think it was annoying, or it did not distract from the film. But it's important to note that this is a Star Wars film that comments on cruelty to animals, and additionally, we're living in an age where there are children that have been born that are fans of Star Wars movies now that don't know a world without war, a world without America at war in the Middle East. And this film comments on it in a very direct way. It's the first Star Wars movie to actually comment on war and living with constant war in our lifetime and having grown up with it. So I think that's worth noting. What are your thoughts on that, Charlie?
No, I agree completely, and I found that it was all handled very tactfully and very well, and supported the story and the characters, and never once felt like it was, calling attention to itself or being, too obvious in its approach. And I actually really do like the fact that they went into arms dealing, and they went all kind of like they kind of went behind the curtain on the war itself. It wasn't just cool ships blowing up other cool ships. It actually got into kind of like the business of war and kind of like how that hurts people, and how the political side of everything as well. So I mean, there's this character played by Benicio del Toro, which his name's JR, what's his name? DJ, that's right. Did they say that in the movie? I don't even remember
if they say it in the movie.
I don't remember them saying his name at all in the movie.
Yeah.
And he's a really interesting character. He I don't know, Benicio del Toro always finds an interesting, unusual way into the character, either through physicality or dialect or whatever. So this is, no exception. But I wonder if he'll be coming back, because, he definitely kind of left things hanging.
He kind of disappeared.
But he kind of made his point, too, which is sort of like, there's good and bad on every side, and it's all a business, basically.
And it feels like they're setting up Episode 9 to be the last Star Wars film. In this sense, not that there'll never be a last Star Wars film. This is the last Star Wars film to be in the chronology of these 9 movies. It really feels like what they'll be doing is they'll be going in completely different directions in terms of standalone films. Additionally, a new trilogy altogether, with, of course, Rian Johnson's trilogy, which was announced even before Last Jedi opened. But there's a couple things I really want to talk about, and the first thing is Luke and the use of Luke in the film. I mean, the reason I've been looking forward to this film, the reason this movie did make me well up with tears, are really moments with Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker and his journey in the original Star Wars trilogy. I mean, that's really what I've always wanted to see, is a Star Wars movie with the adventures of Luke Skywalker. That's what was That's what Star Wars was supposed to be. It was supposed to be from the Journal of the Wills, which they never explain what that is. But Luke, Mark Hamill, best acting that Mark Hamill has ever done as the character Luke Skywalker. I mean, the pathos, the pain. I mean, what he must have suffered through in the 30 years since we saw that character. It's just right there on his face. And again, like I'm dancing up to the things I want to talk about, and I feel like I want to wait until after we see this film because Charlie and I, amongst our group of friends, are the few people who have seen it. But Mark Hamill is Luke Skywalker, and this best he's ever been as that character.
No, I totally agree. I think he was wonderful, and I wish we could have seen a Luke and Han reunion, because this film does provide us with a Luke and Leia reunion, although it's a little bit of a cheat. But it is great to see them on the screen together. It's great to hear John Williams' Luke and Leia theme come back. That was beautiful, and that was definitely one of the moments I teared up, was the two of them back together. It's so great that, well, I mean, it's funny because you look at other movies where a character will return to a character that they made famous 20, 30 years earlier. Like, let's say Harrison Ford in Blade Runner 2049.
I was just going to say that.
He comes back as Deckard. And by the way, it's not to go off on 2049, but Harrison Ford's performance in 2049 is phenomenal. I think it's one of his best performances ever, but the role as written does not feel like Deckard to me. It's like, I don't know who that character is. It's old Harrison Ford, kind of in that world, but that didn't feel like Deckard to me. Mark Hamill as Luke was 120% Luke. I mean, that was Luke Skywalker through and through, because it was not just the sort of like more ethereal, priestly Luke of Return of the Jedi. It was the wisecracking kid from Star Wars as well. He played both sides of that, and it was a lot of fun to see kind of like asshole Luke, back and kind of cracking jokes and talking to Chewie and talking to R2, and it's like, oh, that's really Luke Skywalker. That's not just some actor coming back 30 years later and going through the motions.
Yeah, just that's the other thing is like he's able to ride that strange balance of, he is Luke, but like the humor was there. He has that gravitas as being a legend, right? But the humor, like I'm glad that they balanced that, or Rian Johnson was able to balance that perfectly. Should we talk about some of the negatives, the things that didn't work for us? I think the movie did not need to be 2.5 hours long. I feel that you could have cut this to a tight, I don't know why this needs to be this way. I miss movies that are just 2 hours. 2 hours, unless it's an epic, 2.5 hours is not a good running time. 3 hours, that's an epic movie. 2 hours, 2 hours and 2 minutes with credits, much better. I feel you could cut there could be a fan cut of this that's just where you just cut a bunch of stuff out. Like, so I think that was one. And then you and I both had the same reaction to that gambling planet. Do you want to talk about that? Canto Bite or whatever? Yeah,
I was not a huge fan of the it's funny, when the set photos were leaking out like a year or two ago, and it was photos of people dressed basically in tuxedos, so I called it the Tuxedo Planet. I don't believe it. I don't buy it in the Star Wars universe. It feels very earthly. That not just the costumes, but also the games they're playing in the casino, the champagne bottles and the flutes and things like that. It's very earthy, and I just feel like if it was George Lucas doing it, there'd be holograms and something a bit more, fantastical or fanciful in the design. It wouldn't be as earth driven as this was. So that to me was the one misstep in the film, was all the casino stuff. I felt like was, I get it, and it's a nice change of locale, and I don't think we've really been to a true casino in the Star Wars films anyway. I just wish it had a bit more of that universe.
And notice how in the casino scenes they played music that sound reminiscent of the original Cantina bar stuff, which I really wish I was here raving about the score. Most of the score was just, themes that we have heard in previous Star Wars films. And so I was really hoping for more. Like, I'd like to hear a new theme, and I'm not sure if we heard one.
I think Rose had a theme that every time they cut to the little piece of jewelry she had. We haven't heard the soundtrack on its own yet, but I think she had a theme, and I think that the all the variations of the themes we'd heard previously, especially in Force Awakens, I thought were really nicely brought back and built upon. But yeah, there was a bit of greatest hits album to this score, and I feel like there's an action sequence where the Millennium Falcon is fighting TIE fighters underground on the final planet, and it's taken directly from TIE fighter battle from Star Wars, which was then used again on the skiff barge fight in Return of the Jedi. So it's like that, dun 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 dun.
Right.
That's back again, and it's fine. You wish it was new, but
Yeah, what is it with like is it like because the filmmakers know that our emotions are tied to those things as we originally saw them, that there's something that's not original? But the other thing, okay, well, you can think about that later, but the other thing that's interesting is how much of how many lines in the film felt like they were commenting on the film and or culture surrounding Star Wars, such as forget the past, destroy it. Like, there's this thing in the beginning with Kylo Ren, and it's like, throw the past away, the past is done, the past is dead. And there were a lot of lines in the movie that I'm like, is this happening in the movie, or is this a comment about Star Wars itself as a pop culture experience?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of self-commentary, meta-commentary in this film. But it didn't bother me. That's the thing. Sometimes it bothers me. Sometimes it's very obvious, like in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek films, where I think it was in Into Darkness when Chekhov had to assume, engineering, chief of engineering, and Kirk says put on a red shirt, and then there's like this, kind of like not a gasp, but like there's like this pause where it's almost like the characters know if you put on a red shirt you're going to die, right? Which is more of a fan thing. It's not actually in the universe. So this film, Last Jedi, had some of that sort of wink-wink acknowledgement of things, and yet it never felt wink-wink. It never felt like it was letting the audience in on the joke. It just felt like that's just the life that these characters are living.
Yeah, that's very well said. There are I feel like there's a lot of other thoughts that we could discuss.
There's a huge cameo in the film.
Yes.
I mean, do we dare? We shouldn't say.
No, we shouldn't say.
There is like a huge surprise cameo that I think, a lot of us wondered, where was this character in The Force Awakens? And now this character appears finally here. And it's funny in the way this character appears and the visual treatment of this character, because it's not one we've quite seen before. It sort of is, but it's kind of weird. I'm not sure it's 100% successful, but the audience really seemed to dig it.
And the other thing is, just to prepare yourself, and I don't think we should discuss what happened. There are a lot of deaths in this movie. There are a lot of characters that will not be in Episode 9. And the one thing is, we talked about this as we came out, like, after I saw Force Awakens, I just wanted to fast forward 2 years and see Episode 8. And now that we've seen it, I feel like Episode 8 seems fairly complete, and I have no idea where they're going with Episode 9. Episode 9, no clue. They've set up that there's conflict, but the conflict is gray. It's gray in the sense that, it's now defined that this world is like, as a world at war, or as a galaxy at war, things are not as simple as the good guys and the bad guys. They even comment on the good guys and the bad guys. They say they literally have a discussion about the good guys and the bad guys.
Those words, exactly. I mean, they called them good guys and bad guys in the script, so it's like that's word for word.
Which is weird, because that was where George Lucas just said, when you look at the time in which the original Star Wars, 1977 Star Wars, was made, it was made at a time it was completely the antithesis, it was against all the conventional wisdom of what people in Hollywood thought, movie audiences wanted to go see. And Lucas was making a huge gamble because at the time, because there was a seriousness. We want to make serious movies. We want to make social commentary, political commentary. When you look at movies like Taxi Driver, Godfather, the 70s has often been hailed as a time of great cinema. And so at the time that Star Wars was originally made, it was very different from what was expected. This movie, Star Wars movies, are sort of built so much around merchandising and whatnot. I don't know that it's even able to. I mean, there is this sort of mild commentary on what's happening in our world, but it's really not. It's kind of, I guess, maybe this is more of a comment on, how the film going experience has changed. It's not about going to a movie and discussing it, although amongst our group of friends, that's kind of expected. If you go see a movie, with our group of friends, we're going to get together after, we're all going to discuss it. I feel like people just go to the movies like they go to McDonald's now, which is kind of what Star Wars is. You just go to McDonald's, you have McDonald's, you eat the fast food, and you're done with the fast food, and then you go to the next thing, and then the next day we'll go to a different McDonald's. And it's the way that this stuff is consumed. I mean, Justice League came out a couple weeks ago, a month or so ago, and it was just sort of consumed, chewed up, commented on, spit out, done, over. Like, it's, you can go in a theater and see it with 3 other people. It's strange the way, I guess, that movies are consumed and whatnot. Where am I going with all of this, Charlie? I'm off the rails.
You're 100%. I feel like there's been a lot of just sort of corporate mass consumerism taking over cinema, because if you think about it, when Star Wars and Empire and even Jedi came out, it was a different time. That was auteur filmmaking in its own way. I mean, George Lucas was kind of rewriting the books on what the auteur is, because it was sort of hand in hand with merchandising, which was sort of like not auteur. Like, that was, I think back in the 70s, it was the directors that kind of rose up, have really strong personal styles, and they left a really indelible mark. And it was Lucas and to some degree Spielberg who also did that, but they brought along the toys, right? They brought along this sort of like mass consumer pop culture experience where you brought the movie home with a variety of plastic items and soundtracks and things. And this film, it's interesting because for being a big corporate Disney, $200 million movie or whatever it would cost, has some funky, weird stuff in it. Like, I mean, and that's got to be the Rian Johnson indie filmmaker, DNA that's been mixed into this batch, because it has all the big stuff. It's got the toys. It's got all the big, roller coaster theme park things you would want in a Disney Lucasfilm movie. But there's just some weirdness and quirk to it that I'm really curious to see how that would develop, especially in a Rian Johnson trilogy. And if that plays, and if that really fits into what George Lucas had in mind. That's my biggest question, is what does George Lucas think of this movie? What does he think of this direction? And wouldn't it be great, is even if you brought in strong indie filmmakers like Rian Johnson, that George was still somehow involved as like just an advisor or a mentor figure. And maybe he is unofficially, but I feel like all of his notes are very like late in the game. Like, I mean, I can't imagine he was deep in the making of this movie.
Well, I think you and I both had this discussion of, that we wish that George Lucas could have commented on the Casino Planet scene, because he would, I mean, the one thing we were talking about was like, there's all this like, it just looks like a futuristic casino, which is kind of stupid. And what I loved about the original Star Wars is there's a scene where, you see the droids in the, Jawa Sandcrawler, and there's another droid, but it's a droid based on a completely different alien race. There's things that don't make sense in Star Wars. And I mean this in a good way, in the sense that we don't know what they're for, because we don't have that stuff yet. It doesn't make, but I feel like now all these Star Wars movies, every Star Wars movie is a comment on Star Wars movies. Does that make sense?
It kind of, it doesn't have to be, but it kind of is the nature of the beast, because, here's the thing, and I've said this a lot to other people on other topics, but it's like, when Star Wars was made, so much of that film was world building, and the world building came from not just George Lucas, but a variety of artists. Most of all Ralph McQuarrie, who came from other industries. They came from aerospace or auto design or architecture or whatever, but they didn't come from movies, and they certainly didn't come from movies post Star Wars because they were making Star Wars. Every movie, every science fiction film in particular after Star Wars had a bit of Star Wars mixed in, whether it was Alien or Star Trek the Motion Picture or whatever. It was a reaction to Star Wars. I mean, it might have been radically different, like 180 degrees off, or it might have embraced it. But it was a post-Star Wars world, and every designer at that point became less and less from other industries and more kids who grew up with Star Wars. And I feel like that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing Star Wars movies made by Star Wars kids. And I'm not sure there's the creative discipline or, frankly, the vision that George Lucas had from an original perspective that the original trilogy had. I think now we're seeing ripples and echoes and riffs and takes on what we as kids saw in those original films. And I wonder if there is some sort of purity that's possible at this point for a director to come in and say, okay, this is going to be my all-new story, but it's going to be true to George's vision and not be my own thing and not be so reflective of the kids today and what's modern, because this is a very modern Star Wars film, The Last Jedi. There's a lot of kind of terminology and earth slang in this film that I did not expect to hear in a Star Wars film. I mean, to hear something referred to as big ass, like that big ass spaceship, whatever, it's very weird to hear that in a Star Wars film.
Yeah, we were saying that we were talking in the restaurant, Star Wars kind of made up its own slang. Nerf herder. What's a nerf herder? We don't know, but also it doesn't matter. We don't care. That's slang in the Star Wars universe, and I feel like that there are a lot of quotable lines actually in this movie, and I don't want to say what they are, but and there are a couple moments in the film where audiences are going to lose their shit. There are three or four more than that, I think, moments where people are going to lose their fucking minds watching this film in a good way. But yeah, I feel like that attention to detail, that was something that I feel like Lucas, you can criticize Lucas for aspects of the prequels, but you can't criticize Lucas for not having attention to detail when it comes to, slang or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, even though the prequels have been pretty much universally, trashed, I feel like the prequels are still true Star Wars. I mean, I feel like they're authentic. I don't mean this in a bad way, but I mean, I've also often said to friends, it's I consider all the Star Wars films that Lucasfilm has produced to be canon, but I only consider the 6 made by George Lucas to be gospel. And I don't think these films are gospel because they don't come from George, but they are canon. And I do think Last Jedi is as close as we've seen to what I would consider a gospel Star Wars movie since George left.
Okay, so final thoughts, Charlie.
I really enjoyed it. It's not perfect. It's got some problems, but those quibbles aside, it's a rousing, tremendously enjoyable Star Wars movie. I had a great time. All the cliches. I laughed, I cried, I cheered, I jumped out of my seat. I mean, I have not felt this emotionally engaged with a Star Wars film probably since Return of the Jedi, certainly since Empire. And it was great to see the audience at this kind of dry, cold studio screening, with a bunch of Hollywood insiders that normally don't react like this. People were screaming and cheering. And yeah, there's 5 or 6 moments in this film, 2 in particular, where it was either screaming at the top of my lungs, just cheering, oh my God, that's the greatest thing ever, or gasping, oh, what am I looking at? I've never seen that in a Star Wars movie before. I mean, there's some really great, new, fresh stuff in this film, and I felt the audience responded, and I can't wait to see it again with an audience just for that reaction. Yeah,
this is, I didn't necessarily feel that way about, Force Awakens or Rogue One. I got to see it right away again. No, I feel that way about this, and I feel I feel somewhat, especially maybe this has to do with I hate to mention this, but the death of Carrie Fisher. Her passing, I think, definitely adds a lot more meaning to this film. it's mentioned in the credits, and I think it's worth staying through the entire credits. Her passing, just we know that she has passed. It's also, in viewing The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker added much more meaning to that, and I feel that that's present here. This feels like, for me, not just The Last Jedi, it feels like the last Star Wars movie that's for me. I feel like the next Star Wars movie could be primarily focused on all the new characters, and there you go. I mean, it's really, and that's fine. That's actually okay. I feel like, I can move on to other, I don't collect the Star Wars toys really so much anymore. I don't really, that doesn't matter to me as much as experiences. And I feel it's a very satisfying experience. And as you pointed out, not perfect, but the things it gets so right. And every complaint about this movie, and we've complained about a few things, to me, they're all nitpicking. It's nitpicking, and yes, if George Lucas was there, George Lucas, I think, as a designer, as a brain that thinks about how things should look, he's brilliant at that. But that's not the most important thing. It's a detail that matters to nerds like us. But, well, I'm not saying you're a nerd, but maybe you are.
I'm a nerd. And one last thing I'll say is, what's really interesting is that this being sort of like in the Empire Strikes Back slot in the trilogy, you would expect it to be darker and then end on a cliffhanger. And it doesn't. It's actually lighter. It's kind of like almost like his Return of the Jedi. It's lighter. It's a big sweeping adventure, and it ends with closure. It's like, if this is the last Star Wars film ever, that's okay, because it ends with closure. It doesn't end with what's next. It doesn't end with someone's in jeopardy and we have to go rescue him in the next movie. It not only does it end with closure for the main characters in such a way that, if this had to be it's fine, but there is the final scene of the film, which I thought was kind of very powerful and very beautiful. And the final image in particular, or one of the final images, was, to me, one of the most iconic images in all of Star Wars imagery, which is basically a riff on the lone warrior on the, standing against the horizon, and like a night sky filled with stars, and this sort of adventurous looking up, this adventurous character. I don't want to say who the character is, but this adventurous character looking up at the stars, thinking, what is their destiny? What is their future? What is their adventure? And the film ends with that notion of what is the next adventure, because this one's kind of done in a way.
It's almost like it cleans the slate in a way. So, and thank you for listening to the Film Threat podcast. And Charlie, we can follow you at Lauzirika, spelled
Lauzirika.
Yeah, and I'm that Chris Gore and Film Threat and everything. And may the Force be with you.